Greetings, everyone. Hope you all had a great weekend. We have geopolitical tensions hitting new all-time highs. Price of oils is still near $100, so there has been a lot happening since last episodes. How are you doing today, Versan?
Overall, I'm doing well. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are. As you know, I did run into some technical difficulties yesterday on X. They stopped me from posting. So this is the first time it's ever happened to me. But one of my tweets that I put out, I think it went viral. It got like 1.5 thousand retweets. And I was explaining in there that the greatest illusion in American politics is breaking. And it's not left versus right. It's always been us against the system. And then I revisited some points as far as the BlackRock liquidity crisis. The fact that I did both of those in a row, and they both did very well. Basically, it got out there. It just wouldn't let me put any posts out there. And I suddenly start to feel this noose tighten around my neck, just with the ability to share ideas and thoughts. And it brought me back to what happened to me in 2021. And it made me nervous because I got my YouTube shut down in 2021 because I was warning people about the vaccines. And now they're all facts. It was proven, harmful. So censorship, I don't think it disappeared, even though Elon Musk bought X. I think it really just migrated onto platforms like X, including the mainstream news. And it's pretty damn clear that the control runs very deep on X. And that's why you have, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk. In fact, many people don't know this, but when X was purchased, Elon Musk was the face of the purchase, but Ari Ellison, who built Oracle from the CIA, he was also one of the major investors who helped buy X. And then if you guys remember, the X chair, one of the head board of directors, worked at the World Economic Forum. I don't know if you remember that. So today I'm allowed to post, which is nice, but I have to be very careful. And finally, I'll say, I went to have lunch with a good friend of mine, and I grabbed his phone to see what my X account actually looks like from his end. And all my articles are not being displayed. So I can see them on my phone, but I can't see them through his phone. And then when I sent him the link to the article, he clicked it and it said URL is not recognized. However, on my phone, I can actually read it thoroughly. So it really, it's suppressing my work. This confirms it on another level. Now, I always knew I've been shadow banned, whether it be YouTube or X, but this takes it to a whole nother level. And, the ideas that I'm trying to share with people, they're very powerful, I think. But I've seen some really interesting content out there that's far worse than what I'm talking about, yet it's allowed to flourish. So where I'm going with this is I had a great weekend and a great week paying attention to everything, but it really scared me because I use this to communicate with a lot of my audience. And I understand what you've been through. Like, I really get it. It's just a reminder that our thoughts can be weaponized against us. And without going even too deep, I think that X has sold our data to the Israel lobby. I really believe that.
You are correct. I am the living proof that there's no freedom of speech on X. I am still suspended. They never gave me a valid reason for why my account is not allowed. Back on the time, I was trying to warn everyone about the dormant BTC wallets, precisely when BTC was near the all-time high. And I was actually being very conservative and telling everyone that they were actually sending massive amounts of BTC on centralized exchanges, dormant BTC, that were mined for free, basically, back in 2013. But the whole point here is that now they are adding a new feature to X, which somehow is, they are making X some sort of a bank. I'm not sure if you realize that, but I think that's very dangerous, because if you have a parallel financial system that's running on X, but they can just shut down your accounts, what happens if you have assets on that account? So they can now shut down accounts based on your political beliefs, for instance. And I see that censorship is happening in real time. I know that back when I was banned, it was not that common for someone to lose their accounts. But again, the word goes around. So if you go back on the pandemic, it was very easy to censor anyone on the internet. I lost my Facebook account, which I never recovered, by the way. I lost everything on that account. And right now we have a new geopolitical crisis, and they are once again heavily censoring information. And you can see that X has double standards because you have a lot of fake news, a lot of AI generated content, a lot of people are using it for malicious purpose, but they are selecting which accounts they want to ban. So basically, you can go there and share as much as you want in terms of misinformation. But if you are getting too close to inconvenient truth, then they just shut down your account. And that's exactly what's happened in my case, and now it's happening to your account, Versan, and it's happening for more people now that are reporting on the war, and I have been following this closely. So it's quite concerning that we have this degree of censorship, and you can see that both sides. I think it's time, and I shared this, you made a very nice post on YouTube, Versan, where you share some facts, and I even shared that on my Instagram, which is the fact that people have to wake up that both left and rights, they are colluded. And you see the script is playing out by the mainstream media. So right now you have CNN and Fox News all playing on the same side, if you will. There is not a lot of difference between the two parties, in my opinion, in the United States. So I think they have been playing this game of dividing the population, and this plays out to a global level. And this is honestly the opinion of someone that's I travel a lot. I have friends from multiple nationalities, and it's what I see playing out is divide and conquer. They want Christians to believe that the enemies are Muslims, and they want Muslims to believe that the enemies are Christians. And this is not a reality. I think it's more of us against them. I mean, us, the people, doesn't matter your ethnicity, but we have to understand that the enemy is common. I mean, just look at the censorship. It's against the Epstein class. That's what I believe.
Yeah, it's a web of lies, and they allow which stories to thrive and which ones to suppress. And we talked about this last week. If people are given different versions of the same story, like the consensus can never be reached, but the division remains permanent. And that's what we see. So with all this technology that we have and the centralized systems that sit above it, you can certainly create an environment where you have this permanent division. But more importantly, we're fighting amongst each other. We're being divided while the rich continue to steal all our wealth, tighten the control grid, build out the digital system. And I mean, the very same people that are really pulling the strings, nobody touches them. They remain unharmed. And that's why I'm a political atheist. I don't believe in Democrat or Republican. I don't believe in any of the values anymore. And I don't want to be political, but money and politics go hand in hand. But the truth is they're the same side. I mean, two different sides of the same coin. And that's why every 4 years you see the same BS that's being fed to us with a slightly different version of the same story. And the power keeps getting centralized. That's the reality. Now, that was my tweet. It was more that people are beginning to figure this out. And when I say people, I'm talking about the masses, like the general public. Like many of us, I think, in this community, to give some credit, have figured this out a long time ago. But it's becoming more clear. So it just really sucked that I couldn't tweet for that whole day. And it's funny, the thing I was going to tweet was something about the IRS. Might as well share it here. I was going to say, like, if the IRS gets to print, I mean, why is the IRS squeezing us harder and harder every year when the money is printed out of thin air? And where's that money going? Which is a valid question right now. We're all going to be paying our taxes. And we just started another war. And if you saw Scott Bessent's statement the other day, he's saying we might need to borrow 1.4 trillion. So where does this go? Basically, we're paying to finance our own destruction. I mean, there's got to be a renaissance at some point, but that's a whole different subject. Maybe we can talk about that another time. But the more important issue at hand is that all our assets are truly at the whims of these central bankers and the monetary policies that we're going to talk about here. It's just your assets are truly not safe. And what we saw with BlackRock the other day is a perfect example. Whether it's a few dollars, whether it's 100, I don't care what the math is, but it's all the same, the facts. If they can halt your withdrawals, whether it be millions, billions, it doesn't matter. You think it's liquid and secure, and then suddenly it becomes inaccessible but conditional. So for those clients, who trusted their money was safe, this is the harsh reality of what we're going to talk about today. If you don't own it, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. Now, make no mistake, this is not a single anomaly. What happened with BlackRock is just the tip of the surface. In my opinion, more than just a headline, it's a signal that the entire financial system is truly fragile, that dollar liquidity is going to continue to plunge. You see leverage at extreme levels, centralization that's creating more of the systemic risk that we're talking about here, which will ripple eventually across institutions, banks, and global settlement frameworks. So today it might be BlackRock. Tomorrow it could be any bank. It could be any custodian or any platform that you thought you could trust. And that's why it's a stark reminder that ownership is true control. And hence the thumbnail, ownership is safety, is survival.
I 100% agree, Versan. We're going to see a stress test on the system. And something that puzzles me is that the imminent threat of cyber attacks, and that's something that has been heavily discussed by Davos 2026, the World Economic Forum. And what is interesting is that right now, well, there are two scenarios, okay? So the first one that I even made a video about it yesterday is that at some point we can have a cyber attack on the financial system, whether if that's going to be orchestrated by Iran or if that's going to be a false flag. They can also use Mossad, and they can just pull out a false flag and they can blame everything on Iran, for example. That's a possibility. So I think it's extremely important right now, especially in these moments of global tensions. They can use that as a perfect excuse to just wipe out crypto exchanges. So there is a real possibility of cyber attacks, and there is something interesting. They can even target the preeminent messaging system of the financial system, which is SWIFT, and this opens the possibility for banks and financial institutions at that moments of stress to find an alternative messaging system, a messaging system that is not affected by the internet going down, for example, or an asset that can't be instrumentalized by any sovereign nation. The answer for that is blockchain technology. Most precisely, XRP fits perfectly this role as an asset that is a neutral bridge asset. So by the time, if we have a cyber attack on the financial system, precisely against SWIFT, which is a real possibility. By the way, Iran is not part of SWIFT anymore, and so it's not part of Russia. So we can have this playbook once again, problem, reaction, solution. It doesn't really matter who is behind the cyber attack. As I said, it might be Iran itself. It might be a false flag, and we know that they have been carrying out a lot of false flags. They did that in Saudi Arabia. If you guys are updated about the tensions in war, the war tensions, I think it was Tucker Carlson that even said openly that Israel was carrying out false flag operations in Saudi Arabia. So that's on their playbook. So the real question is which assets actually can solve this problem? And the answer is it's quite easy. It's XRP. They can't solve that by using BTC. Only assets that have low transaction fees and can process thousands of transactions per second could solve this issue. How do you see that, Versan?
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. There's just so much information that goes into this. One thing I do want to remind people, we talked about this last year. Last year, we actually told people there would be a false flag event and it would start the war. But we did cover the fact that there were documents, there were public memos There were real strategy discussions sitting on Dick Cheney's desk in 2001. Maybe you guys remember this, but on those documents, it did say and have the groundwork already laid out to everything that you see happening today. So I think when we start putting a lot of these videos out there, in fact, I want to share a video with everyone from Jim Rickards. They're foreshadowing what's going to happen. So when people say like, oh, that's old, well, it's more relevant today than it was back then, right? Now, Dick Cheney in 2001, he had this groundwork for the invasion of Iraq. We already know that. False flag, by the way. That goes back to 9/11, which is a whole different discussion. We went to war. They had the groundwork laid out for Afghanistan. That didn't even occur until 2008, if I'm not mistaken, when the financial crisis happened. So you see this pattern happening, okay? So like I said, everything you see happening right now, the rising geopolitical tensions, the currency weaponization, the trade fragmentation, these are the same forces that we saw also that drove the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. The same thing is playing out again. History is repeating, rhyming differently, but they are going to use or stage some false flag event to justify the invasion of Iran, okay? And this is already happening, the groundwork. Final thing I'll say as far as war cycles, you know, it took 8 years of conflict before World War II began. And that was also financed by the Rothschilds on both sides and some of the other banking dynasties. So we're seeing the same forces that are going to drive all this change. And what's really going to drive the change into alternative currencies is going to be the fragmentation of trade, the geopolitical conflict we just covered, the loss of trust and confidence in the Bretton Woods system, in the highly leveraged dollar-denominated assets, and how tightly it is interconnected into all our lives. So I don't think the timing is coincidental. I think the sovereign debt market is going to really trigger this. You see an implosion already beginning to crack. So defaulting is not really on our domestic obligations is not going to happen. They're going to justify more QE spending, stealth QE. But this is going to continuously create more and more pressure that's going to ultimately drive people into alternative settlement systems. And that's why I've always said when it's XRP, I look at it as settlement infrastructure. I don't treat it like a cryptocurrency. The system is eventually going to demand a neutral agnostic bridge asset that's going to be trusted by all sides independently. And that's when you start talking about gold playing its role. And we can talk about that later. But at the end of the day, you're going to have this rush into new settlement infrastructure because people just don't trust the system anymore. And the system is what's driving all the corruption that you see in the world, the war, the conflict. It's the dollar. I'm sorry. The dollar, like I've said before, it's a weapon. It's not even a currency anymore. And I can prove this on so many different levels. But right now, we're in a situation where the dollar is devaluing faster than we can earn the money. You're already in a recession. It's just what's going to trigger that next catastrophic event that's going to drive capital rotation into tangible assets. And we already see this. So settlement currencies are going to play a very big role in this. That's XRP, in my opinion. Of course, it has complementary niche technologies like XLM and HBAR, which are also quantum proof. We talked about that as well. So it's going to be very interesting. I'm optimistic, but the changes are happening faster than most people can get a grip on it and adopt to it. So we are blessed. We are fortunate that we got ahead of this, in my opinion.
I agree with you, Versan, and I can see all the roads leading towards blockchain adoption. Although that makes me sad for humanity, because what we are seeing right now, so many war crimes, it's even difficult to put everything that I feel in words. But I want to expand in one of my conclusions, and that is ultimately the end of the US dollar as a global reserve currency. I think that's ultimately the final outcome of this conflict. Now, my question is the United States doing that intentionally, or that's ultimately going to be an accident? So let me expand. What's happening right now? The Strait of Hormuz is virtually closed. So we have almost no ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And a lot of people, I think everyone at this point knows that we have an oil crisis and the price of oil continues to rise. As we speak, it's still above $100. So the real problem is that the Strait of Hormuz is not only about oil. As we know, the domino theory, which we already discussed here with Jay Claver once in our podcast, is that Japan gets 80% of its oil directly from Iran. But it doesn't end there. So through the Strait of Hormuz, it also comes essential goods for the Middle East. As a reminder, most countries there, they don't produce water, for example. They don't have enough food. So they rely on the Strait of Hormuz for a lot of things. But besides the essential goods, they also use the Strait of Hormuz for selling their oil. So what happens is that right now they are unable to sell oil in exchange for petrodollars, and usually what they do is that they recycle those dollars back into the US financial market. So what's going to happen is that there will be no choice. If they don't open the Strait of Hormuz, I give it a couple of weeks until they are forced to withdraw those dollars from the US financial markets. That's going to trigger a massive liquidity crisis. So you can combine the fact that the Middle East countries, and you have Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, you have Bahrain. If all of them simultaneously withdraw their petrodollars from the US financial markets, the bubble simply bursts. This is number one. Then we have all the situation in Japan, and that ultimately is going to crash the US dollar. And I think at some point, we're going to have a new world currency, and that's going to be blockchain based. Now, my question is the United States doing that intentionally, or that's going to happen by coincidence? Because I can't believe they are committing so many mistakes when it comes down to the war in Iran, because honestly, Iran is not Venezuela, and this war is not something that's going to resolve in a couple of weeks. We are talking about blood. We are talking about months of confrontations. They just elected a new supreme leader. This decision was announced, I think it was announced yesterday. So the situation is only deteriorating quickly. It's getting worse by the day. And I think right now people don't even comprehend how that's going to affect the S&P 500, because S&P 500 is still near all-time highs, but so it is gold. So the last time this happened was back in 2008. So you have a correlation. So it's a very likely scenario that we're going to have a hard crash on the S&P 500s. And honestly, the US financial markets at that point are going to get obliterated.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. As far as Japan, listen, you have mounting pressure all over the world. Japan is just the best example. And if you have this embargo continue as far as oil getting to Japan, that's when basically the credit markets are going to start to strain. When you have that, leverage becomes exposed. And then the margin calls start hitting. When you have those margin calls, listen, it is a little bit complex and interconnected on a different level. I don't even understand it yet to that extent, like maybe Jay Claver does, but it's been very clear that like Japan has been preparing for this for a very long time, and it's going to create a liquidity crisis, because if money starts flowing back to Japan and the credit markets become under pressure, that's when you have the need for this neutral instant settlement system that's outside of the dollar or outside of the yen. And that becomes unavoidable. And that's exactly where XRP becomes a liquidity tool to move value instantly. As far as fiat currency, I mean, the end game of fiat currency is already in motion. That much is clear. Like I said a few minutes ago, the dollar and fiat currencies around the world are debasing faster than we can earn the money. And that becomes a problem, because if you can't earn the money fast enough that it's being printed, and, it's cyclical with every oil spike we've seen. If you do a little bit of historical research, you start to see that whenever oil does spike like this, it's never isolated. It's tied to some other bigger things in the economy that could potentially break. And that's when you start to see the QE program take place. And I think we talked about that a few weeks ago. So when you start bridging all these things together, you start to realize that they're going to have to print so much money to justify everything we're talking about here. And that's simply going to debase the currency faster. It's going to allow the rich to buy up more of the assets that we can't afford to hold on to. And that's going to distort the wealth gap even more. And that's why I still buy gold and silver. I don't care how high the price is. And just to clarify, the precious metals markets are still being manipulated and kept artificially at these prices so they can buy more. There's a time and place for all of this to reveal itself, but it has nowhere else to go besides up. And any volatility you see, just remember that's opportunity to buy because it's artificially being suppressed. But eventually, I think this is all going to crack, and you're going to have liquidity move into other assets.
Versan, there is something I forgot to mention. I didn't share. Yeah, someone just put in the comments. That's exactly what I want to touch, which is about in the Strait of Hormuz. It also passes sulfur, which is used to actually manufacture sulfuric acids, which is utilized to extract minerals, particularly copper. So if you don't have enough sulfuric acid, you can have a copper shortage, which is quite interesting. Apparently, 40% of the world's sulfur comes straight from the Strait of Hormuz. So it's also another interesting point. I know you have been talking a lot about copper.
I've been buying a lot of copper too.
Likewise.
Yeah, I mean,
thanks to you.
when I make investments nowadays, I really think about the inflationary effect. I want to get more for my dollars before they become worthless. So the real opportunity is copper for me. Anyone else that doesn't have monetary metals like gold and silver, I would recommend still accumulating silver. You really think silver is cheap or expensive at these prices? It's not. Silver really is being manipulated to such a degree, like I don't think most people can fathom. And the fact that the demand keeps expanding while the supply keeps draining and the price keeps being stagnant, it becomes pretty clear of what's going on there. Heavy manipulation. And silver should certainly be trading over $300-400. I know that sounds crazy to some, but in this environment, give me a break. For how much circulating dollars are out there, give me a break, right? I think in a currency reset, you basically have assets being repriced outside of dollars, and that's what a currency reset is essentially. I'm not saying the dollar is going to go away. I'm not saying it's imminent that it's going to collapse. But if you look at the trend and the trajectory of how things are playing out, the debasement trade in itself is going to eventually push people outside of the dollar. And that's why they have stable coins now. Whole different discussion. But when you hold a stable coin, I should just note this, that you're holding somebody else's liability. And it's mostly the federal government. When you buy gold and silver, it's basically you giving the middle finger to the government and opting out. I think the same goes for certain technologies like XRP. But this is a very dangerous time. The window of opportunity is closing, and it's getting harder and harder to invest and to live your life with dignity. That's the real challenge here. This is no way to live for anybody. We are slaves in a system that we constantly pay to work against us. And I'm just tired of it. I'm sure a lot of you are too, but I mean, something has to be done. So it comes down to education, Edo. The more we can spread this message to people, the more we can fight back. It's quite clear, but this is the end game, or at least the early stages of the end game. And war is usually going to be the geopolitical driver for all these changes that we're talking about. And we're in the early stages of this. Trump said it was going to be a short war. He said the same about Ukraine. It hasn't been. He was supposed to end it. Now, I don't care about the political narrative, but these are the facts. More and more people have to die. And just to clarify, like Pete Hegseth, whatever his name is, the Secretary of the War Department, You know, he was planted in there by the Z regime, if you know what I'm talking about. So, I mean, I feel like more Americans, really specifically Americans, need to wake up to the reality that these people do not serve you. They serve their own interests. And the sooner you understand this, the faster you're going to be able to protect yourself, and you're going to be able to challenge the system that is working against you. This is a satanic cabal that's running the entire world right now. And we have to do something about it. This is the best I can do. Talk about it, educate, share it with people. And, you know, for all the other guys out there that are sharing this content, like, I really appreciate it. But you have an obligation to your loved ones, your friends, to take this upon yourself and go with the light and share this information with people. I'm not telling you to redirect them to our podcast. You have to do this yourself. So everyone has an obligation here to get the word out there.
I agree with you, Versan. It's about, we are all parts of this consciousness. So each of you has an individual voice. And I think at this moment is extremely important that everyone decides, makes a conscious choice to speak the truth. It's become pretty evident that the word is, I don't know how, it even sounds like it's a dream, but that's the reality. The world is run by Satanists. I don't know how to put it in different words. Sounds like a conspiracy, I know, but look back what they have accomplished back in 2019. And all of this war and destruction, we really have to take action and speak against this evil agenda that's playing out in real time. Another thing, we have been very successful in wealth preservation. If you guys follow our podcast, our strategy, gold, silver, precious metals, staying away from fiat currencies that are constantly losing its purchasing power. But it's also about our freedom, right? So what is it all worth that if we're going to become extremely rich in a system that we can't even benefit from our assets because of so much control, surveillance, CBDCs? And there is a question that I have for you, Versan, which brings me back to the point of central bank digital currencies. Do you think they have escalated the attacks against Iran because the central bank was not following the global agenda? Therefore, I think Nathan did a tremendous work by spreading the message. He did a very viral reel on Instagram. Not sure if you watched that the Iranian central bank was considered to be a leakage of the system, which they had no control over it. Therefore, it justifies why they are treating Iran in that way. Could you please let me know your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, again, my X account is shadowed for this material. I recently posted this a few days ago saying, like, all the material that's coming out of the propaganda and the mainstream propaganda that's migrated to X, you see it very clearly. It's obvious. And certain accounts are allowed to flourish while others really giving you something to think about critically are not. It becomes even more clear that this is a different kind of mainstream now that's migrated to X. However, what I tweeted and shared with people is that any country that does not bow down to the New World Order is called a terrorist, is called an enemy, is vilified. And that's what we've done over and over again. A good friend of mine, Gerald Salente, which I'd love to bring him back on the show again, but he is very angry about this for the right reasons. But he's explained that we have been taught to hate other countries and to hate other people and to believe in the narrative that they are the enemy. And there's this really viral clip that it gave me tears when I watched it. And it's a soldier speaking in a winter storm with other soldiers explaining that the real enemies are in Washington, D.C. and in the Congress, who have sold out the country for their own political gain and favor of the same masters that they serve. So this goes really deep, and you've got to study the history about how we got here, and that will give you an idea of where we're going. So any country that did not bow down to the New World Order was treated as a villain. Gaddafi was warning people about the pandemic 20 years before it happened. He told people they were going to push a virus. It would be a lie. and they would sell you the cure and profit both ways and take away your freedom. Saddam Hussein, not a good person either. Okay. But Saddam Hussein, if you watch his death sentence that was being shared again, it resurfaced. He's saying in there, like, down with you and the collaborators. And the collaborators are the foreign governments he's talking about. And he's talking about the Zionist regime. We have to be very careful here. But I mean, this is the way the world works. You have a few people at the very top running the entire system downwards, and the puppets that you see on CNN, Fox News, CNBC, MSNBC, whatever, The View. These are people to indoctrinate the young and the youth and to sterilize critical thinking. They don't want people to figure it out for themselves that they're getting jammed on the backside by the very same people who are playing the flute and telling you one thing and after another, but sharing the same story. So yes, Nathan is correct. His analysis is always spot on. But we've seen this over and over again. This is a pattern in repeat, and we will be in a war with the world and ourselves if we don't wake up and start to realize it's a really dangerous territory. And I have friends in the Middle East. Let me tell you something, man. Good people out there, very good people. They only show you the bad. And guess what? New information, which I've been saying before, and in fact, I have on my X account. That's the one I did not delete, where I said ISIS, Al-Qaeda, what was it, Hamas, they were all financed by the very same people who are calling them terrorists. So they create the illusion of fear. So we go along with it. And the majority of the population are naive enough to go along with it without critically thinking and analyzing the facts and the history behind what has actually transpired to get us to where we are today. So until it, like I said, it comes back to education. Like, people need to understand that we're being played. All of us are being played, and we're not really helping ourselves unless we wake each other up. And that's why I love what I do. I'm so passionate about this, but every time I try to share my real thoughts, I get censored, man. I really do. My YouTube channel has been banned for so many years that it takes a lot of effort for you guys, the supporters. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, to share my information with people just so I can get found and discovered. But to your point and Nathan's point, yes, if you don't play along, you're going to be excluded from the system. And that's the scary thing, is that we are now at the turning point of the monetary infrastructure, where the digitization and the digital control grid are getting tighter and tighter as more and more people lose their ability to live with dignity because they have no wealth. And that wealth was created out of something we call a central bank, which is made up out of thin air. And it's a private entity. By who? So why are we playing by their rules? We don't have to. We are billions of people united. And recently I watched the movie V for Vendetta with my wife. Great movie. I encourage everyone to see it. It will inspire you. But we have the power to take back control. And we have, like I said last time, we had the technology. Right now, we have the technology to build parallel economies already. We just have to have the strength, the courage, the faith to accomplish this. And I think that's what's happening even with XRP and various cryptocurrencies. There are people out there with good, honest intentions who are trying to build a system outside of a system. And the problem is we are allowing the big banks and institutions to infiltrate these systems that can free us and now centralize us. So how do you participate in a system where you don't want to play along with their agenda and not be excluded from being able to buy food? And that's what it comes down to. Remember the clip we shared where it's from a movie called Early Warning, 1981. And the guy says, even the most overzealous and religious will conform to our agenda to put food on the table. And that explains why Bill Gates and some of the other Amazon too, who's not innocent, just so you know, Jeff Bezos, they're buying up all the infrastructure, the farmland, the water rights. Told you this before. I have clients who are farmers. They have some very sad stories to share, how they are being pushed and forced by various tactics to sell their land, to sell their water rights, because they want to poison us. They want to control everything. So when you are part of the mark, you have the mark of the beast, or whatever you want to call it, the digital system will exclude you from being able to feed your own family unless you don't play by their rules. And if you don't play by the rules, you know, you suffer. If you do play by the rules and step out of line, you're penalized. And if you're penalized, your neighbor or good friend is not going to make the same mistake. Now, all of a sudden, the narrative goes as exactly the way they want it because people are afraid. That's where we are. And it's become quite clear that the one that's going to govern and survey all of this is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, like I said last time, is the opposite of mathematical reality. The world we live in is based on mathematics and physics. That's angelic code. That's God, right? That's created by God. That's angelic code. It has the harmony and balance of all things, whether it be people too, plants, animals. We are all interconnected of collective consciousness on different levels, solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. And the fact that we're building these AI systems to hack those realities and break that mathematics and entrap us and ensnare us, that tells you that this artificial intelligence is not really what people are taught to believe in. It's a beast that is consolidating enough information to keep track of all of us all at once. And AI will be the governance behind this and surveillance. You can look at Palantir for that. You can look at Oracle. You can look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk plays both sides, for those who haven't figured it out. So all of this is tied into what the title says here. And BlackRock, as we know, is the largest asset manager on the planet Earth. They are buying up everything because they work closest to the central banks. And the Rockefellers, by the way, own a partial stake in BlackRock. So if they can buy up everything, enforce the digital control grid with the United Nations, and they are part of this, by the way, along with the Vatican, then they can usher in their new world order. They really could. So this is not a fear-based analysis. These are real facts that people treat as conspiracies until it's too late to realize, what have I done? What can I do to fix this? So, like I said, we have to fight for our freedom. And I've shared this with my wife many times. Money is important, but money is maintenance to put food in your mouth. That's it. It's a way for us to buy time. Sadly, this is the world we live in, where we're not focused on our spirituality, but we're instead focused on paying our rent. That is no way to live. So all I'm trying to do is encourage people by giving this rant, the fact that we have the power as a united people to take control back.
And this is also tied to what they have been doing, killing the trust in elected politicians so that they can offer a solution which happens to be a technocracy. What gives me hope is that apparently a lot of people are waking up to this reality. So I still believe it's in our hands, in each one of us. I don't believe this is the end game. And we already explained that with XRP, this is a great example. We can run a parallel economy. In the same way, you can lay the technology to roll out CBDCs and create forms of programmable money. Example, CBDCs on top of the XRP ledger with stable coins. But you can also leverage the native asset of the XRP ledger, XRP, as a neutral bridge asset, an asset that is no subject to the clawback feature. I already explained this in the podcast, but I'm going to repeat this once again. On the XRP ledger, you have a clawback feature which applies for stablecoins and other issued assets on the ledger. So this allows AI agents to run an autonomous economy on top of the ledger where transactions are executed automatically, where they can freeze, seize, and confiscate assets issued on top of the XRP ledger. So this can indeed be utilized as a mechanism of control. And I think if the United States win this war, we are going to be one step closer for universal CBDCs. So this leads to XRP adoption. But in the other side of the spectrum, if us as XRP holders use XRP to transact with each other, buy goods and services, for example, if I want to send money to Versan from Europe to the United States, there's no technical way where they can prevent these transactions from happening outside of the system. So regardless of the outcome of the war, regardless of what's going to happen, are we going to move towards a technocracy or not? I don't have the definitive answer, although it looks like yes, but we can always run a parallel economy that runs on top of XRP, and that's the beauty of technology. So it's also not giving God-like powers to digital assets and to governments or whatever, because I think ultimately we're always going to have a choice, and that's somehow how the elites operate. If you think about it, nobody forced anyone to get the vaccine, for example. So I think they operate with universal laws that can't outperform God's laws, God's nature laws, and I think we're always going to have, so ultimately we're going to have free will, and it's about us to put our chins up and not be defeated, not be dispirited, although I know it's quite a nervous situation. If I go and I research a lot about what's happening with the war, I get very upset sometimes because they are committing war crimes. And if you guys have been following, I don't want to mention the atrocities that have been committed in the last 5-6 days, but I promise you, if you go look into details, it's enormous atrocities. But in the other hand, I think we still have the power to turn the situation around. We can run a parallel economy, and individually, we are small drops, but if we put our efforts together, we can create ripples and we can become the whole ocean. I think this is the message I wanted to share.
I think it's very powerful and quite beautiful, if we can accomplish something like that together, but it's going to really take a lot of work. And, that's why I try so hard to put this information out there. But, basically, ultimately, everyone, knowing that this is a parallel economy being built or a parallel banking system, and XRP being the bridge, all value migrates from one place to another. And just so you know, historically, and this is a fact, when markets are tanking, it's not money that's vanishing out of thin air into nothing. It moves from one place to another. So if all value, and we talked about all these geopolitical conflicts that are driving these changes and going to justify them, the monetary policies, all the nonsense you see. But that means ultimately, if all value is being consolidated into a few technologies that actually provide a real use case, not a speculative meme coin, things of that nature, then yes, ultimately people do have the potential to be wealthy. Because if value starts flowing back to the participants, the economy itself will be guided by these systems, these protocols, and basically wealth can be redistributed amongst the people, right? Or the ones holding the gate, the gatekeepers, essentially, the access points. And I think that's kind of where the value is driven via XRP being a gatekeeper into the new system. And I think once people really begin to understand this, and it's not easy to understand XRP on so many different levels, but if you can resonate this, you start to see the same future that we're talking about here. And I really don't have words sometimes to express it, but it basically, I'm trying to say there's opportunity ahead. And the value that we create and the investments that we make in these protocols, in this parallel economy, will ultimately give back to the ones who are holding them. You see what I mean? So that's why I've always said I don't treat XRP like cryptocurrencies. Sadly, it is coupled to the broader crypto market, and the broader crypto market is broadly tied to the debt market, which is another Ponzi scheme. And that's how you get your Bitcoin wealth extraction cycles. And we're not going to get into that. But, let me play this video from Jim Rickards. I'm going kind of back to the BlackRock thing for those who did not see it. But this is important. I think he was foreshadowing about what's going to play out later on. And this is why it's so important for you to take control of your wealth, take control of your assets, whether it be digital or physical. The idea is to get out of the system that is tied to these systemic risks and things that you have no control over. All right, so you might have seen this, but let me play this out for you guys. Okay, it's short. Give me 1 second. Sorry.
When the next crisis hits, the elites are planning to freeze the financial system, and they'll replace it with a new system, one not based on the US dollar. When that happens, we'll wake up to a very strange and disturbing new reality.
And for our viewers that are watching today, what might their reality look like that morning? How does this manifest?
First, they'll have gone to bed knowing that a massive financial crisis was underway. But when they wake up, they'll find it has worsened and the contagion has spread worldwide. When they go to withdraw money, their ATM will say closed temporarily. When they go to sell stocks, their account will say transaction not available. When they go to their local business, that business will only accept cash if it's open. As citizens realize they're being barred from their money, riots will erupt. It's going to get really bad really quickly.
How would such a freeze actually work?
When the next crisis hits.
All right, guys. So I shared this. You heard it. The devil's in the detail. Now, the original video for this is, I think, like 15 minutes long, if I'm not mistaken. But what I want to reiterate to everybody is the fact that you have to be mindful that there's a lot of these institutional custody platforms and these banks, the exchanges, you name it, they're all tied to what he's talking about. So they're not separate. What is an exchange of crypto? It's really tied to the regulatory systems that are tied to the financial systems that are traditional. And BlackRock has its hands in all of it, Vanguard and Rockefellers. So all I'm trying to tell people is you have to be very mindful. There are very influential people that are strategically working so hard to really take control, not just of your XRP, but other assets under the pretense of regulation, network support, institutional necessity. And that's something I've noticed in this ecosystem that's very problematic. Sadly, people can pitch all they want about staking and yield to help the network, but in reality, what you're not realizing, not you guys, I'm talking generally, is that you're actually surrendering control of the very asset that the network is being built around for that institutional demand. And the problem is, if you're earning and staking, you're still earning and staking on an asset that's denominated in dollars. So you're giving up control without even realizing it for the illusion of profit. All I'm saying is there's a time and place for this. Mark my words on it. And this is not doom and gloom. This is a freaking fact. I have to be careful what I say sometimes because, I don't want to get sued for slander or sued for conjecture or defamation or anything like that. So I have to be cautious. But I'm trying my best, guys. I really am.
We have around 7 minutes left of podcast before we reach 1 hour. One thing that I want to share, and that's very wise at this moment, it is a very critical moment for the S&P 500. If the price of oil keeps rising, we can have a massive crash on the S&P 500. That's inevitable. So I think it's very wise to have liquidity aside, number one, so that you can profit from the volatility that comes ahead. Number two, I advise everyone, if you are seeking to increase your XRP bags, for instance, have some buy orders in advance. Don't wait for a moment when the S&P crashes and you believe you are going to be able to buy, for example, XRP below $1, because that's not going to happen. When exchanges are under high stress, most orders are not executed. They prioritize institutional orders. So the way you can outbid other buyers is by simply having your buy orders in advance. So I think this is the message I want to share. Have some liquidity aside in case there is a market correction. Usually for XRP, that's short-lived. We have seen this cycle. We had other flash crashes that were momentaneously, and most people were not even able to buy XRP. So if you are trying to increase your bags, have the buy orders ready. It's a critical moment. Number two, avoid holding large sums of money into centralized exchanges. Don't give away self-custody of your digital assets. So you need to have cold wallets. I don't care which brand are you going to choose. You can go for Ledger, Trezor, Decent. There is a bunch of good products in the market. So don't focus that much on the product itself. Focus on getting your digital assets out of centralized exchanges, especially in these moments that there is a war. I think the situation is not going to be getting any better. If you really see at the military options of the United States now, it's not going to be resolved in the next 2 or 3 days. This is going to drag on for weeks in the best scenario, in the worst scenario, months or years. So get ready for volatility, get ready for a correction on the S&P 500. I think limit your exposure to leverage trading, because if you're just going to liquidate your portfolio now, you are just stressed with the war, you're trying to profit before the crash comes. They're just going to manipulate the markets. Just imagine what they are doing with the oil prices. We saw a huge spike all the way up to $120, and then we saw this correction to $100. What do you think is the reason? They are liquidating people that are long on oil. It's clear a extraction mechanism. That's why I don't recommend people to get exposure to copper through the futures market, which they are now making it available. By the way, I got a notification from some of the exchanges that I have my assets that I trade. I do trade on a daily basis with a small fraction of my capital, but I'm not telling people to get exposure to copper, for example, on the futures markets, but find a way perhaps to buy the physical copper. So you are protected against market manipulation. The same apply for crypto. So be very careful ahead. It's going to be a lot of stressful times if you are on the markets. We're going to see a lot of volatility. And don't fuck this up now by getting liquidated, because if we have a correction, you're not going to have liquidity aside.
Yeah, very powerful. One thing I do want to share, I noticed a comment. I'm just not, I'm not too enthusiastic about it, but you got to understand. You remember the book called The Great Taking by David Roger Webb? Okay. If you haven't watched that documentary, I encourage you to. Now, he's been on Danielle Cambone's show a few times. But he lays it out so clearly about what's actually been going on. And he exposed how governments are passing these silent laws to convert everything you own on these exchanges, Caleb and Brown as well. So I think he knows who he is now. And I don't care what I have to say about it, but I'm going to say it because I care. All right. And this is something I realized. If everything is on these exchanges, you start to realize that you are a victim to what I'm about to share with you. The laws that are being changed in such a way are happening very quietly at the Senate banking level. Okay. And basically that includes your property, your securities, therefore your investments, your stocks, your accounts, your assets, your liabilities, your gold and silver, you name it. And these are not theoretical. These are real laws that are being passed. And like Jim Rickard said, they rigged the international laws of finance to accomplish this. That is very important right there. So they are redefining what it means to own assets, all right, in the adjustments of their bankruptcy proceedings. So when they go bankrupt, they're going to take everything you have, everything. Mark my words on that. And this is where it gets crazy. When you start to look at the tokenized model, and this is why tokenization plays a good role and a bad role. In the tokenized model, the entire global economy is being tokenized and converted into a tokenized structure. Therefore, everything you have, everything you are, so even your data, your biometric data, is going to become fractionalized, trackable, movable across the rails that they control. And that's the problem here. So you're essentially becoming a victim to your own servitude without even realizing it. And that's why cold storage is truly the safest. I don't care what they say, because they are mostly full of shit. And I know a lot of people here. Okay. The way I would approach everything that Edo just labeled is be outside of the systemic systems, the systems that are tied to all the risk that we're talking about here. Here's how I approach this. My 3-tier strategy I've shared with people. Number one is I have my long-term holdings. The long-term holdings are something I don't ever touch. I frequently, I check on them once a month, maybe, okay, just to see where they're at. But I simply just keep adding to those long-term portfolio assets whenever I can afford to. A dollar cost average, as some people call in this ecosystem. And that way I don't overthink it. I don't worry about it. I just keep accumulating to my core position for the future. My short-term positions, however, are very interesting because this is where I'm actively engaged. Now, I don't try to predict the markets. I don't predict their moves, everything, right? Instead, what I do is I watch for this massive volatility. Like when we saw this narrative with Iran, like what we're seeing right now in the markets, right? Okay, I don't know if they're green or red today, but I use very simple indicators for my short-term strategy. Red versus green, dips versus the rallies. And that's my guide into the entry points. So I recently added a few thousand into SHX and, during a dip. Now I'm not timing this perfectly, but I'm waiting for the next swing, and the swing will be tied into the QE liquidity injections. So once it swings, I'll take 80% of those profits. And what I'll do is strategically rotate them back into gold and silver. Now, my rule is quite simple. I have a long-term strategy that is silently. I accumulate for the long term, and I engage in short-term opportunities whenever I can afford to. And I take profits strategically, and I always rotate them back into gold and silver and other core foundations. And that's how you, number one, maintain control over yourself. You also grow your long-term position, and you can protect yourself from the system's vulnerabilities. So you essentially keep getting wealthier. And that's the trajectory I've been on for a while. And I've been sharing this with you for a very long time. So I hope you guys are disciplined enough to follow that structure. It really works. It's a recipe for all. It does work.
100% agree, Versan. If you have a strategy, if you have patience, and if you are disciplined, volatility is your friend. So there's nothing to be scared about. Even if there is a correction, you have your buy orders in place, you can massively benefit from this type of transitions. I made thousands just by having buy orders in place. Every time there was a flash crash on XRP this cycle, my orders were instantly above. I mean, you get this massive wicks and you buy it, and instantly you are just benefiting from the volatility.
It's like swing trading.
Yeah, it's quite, you don't need even to trade. You just buy it and send to your cold wallet, but you're always buying below market prices, and you can massively profit from this transformation.
Yeah.
So I think we can jump on the final thoughts. First, my final message is patience. I think this is the most important weapon that you have when you are investing in crypto. Second, I want to send a special thanks for all of your support. We do read the comments. We get so many positive messages from everyone. And third, I ask you guys, drop your location in the comments so you help us to boost the algorithm. So we get a bunch of comments and the live gets delivered to more people. Versan, any final thoughts that you want to share?
I just want to thank everyone for all your support. And, I want to make sure people understand I'm not referring to Jake Claver. Okay. Jake is somebody I totally agree with on many of his insights. But, it's just, I'm talking about the broader community. There are a lot of people out there incentivized to push you into institutional custody. You can make a lot of money doing that. And I'm just not recommending it. That's all, as a friend.
Perfect.
Be careful.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to see you next Monday, I guess, if we don't decide to make an emergency podcast this week. We never know.
Yep. All right. Take care, everyone. Bless you all.
Yeah. Bye-bye.